And we're live.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our first committee meeting of community development. It's always fun to start a new committee off and see where it takes us. So we begin today by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Wolastoq Way, and these territories are covered by treaties of peace and friendship of the Wolastoq Way people, first signed with the British Crown in 1725. So I guess it being our first meeting, and I know that we don't all know each other or probably even recognize each other or know anything about each other, we'll just after we approve the agenda, we'll do welcome and introduction. So first, if I could have someone make a motion to approve the agenda.
Lorraine.
Lorraine. By Lorraine, seconded by Tim on the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion is carried. All right, well, let's do it around the table and maybe we can introduce ourselves, say where we're from, and then maybe a little bit about what brought us to this committee, why this one in particular of all the committees, why this was of particular interest. So Tim, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Tim Fox. I'm a counselor in Hanwell. Like our chair, I was once the executive director of the Fredericton Community Foundation, as well as the executive director of the Kidney Foundation. And so this committee, currently I do some part-time work with John Howard, volunteered with them for quite a bit of time as well. So for me, it's, I was really interested, especially in the housing component and the transportation component of this committee. And that was my interest, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
So my name's Don Fitzgerald, and I'm on the staff here at the commission, and I've been tasked to be the lead support for this committee. Interesting in the circle of connections. I was on the board of the Community Foundation when Tim and Kate both were executive directors. So I've had to develop social conscience for a while, and I'm looking forward to how we try to create, support the wellness in our communities in our region. And so I'm here to serve you, and I'm here to execute your vision.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Smith. I'm the CEO of the Capital Region Service Commission. And much like the others, I used to dabble in part of my previous career with the foundation. And that was when Tim was, I guess, Councillor Fox was the executive director. And I'm an ex officio member of each and all committees within the service commission. So you'll see me from time to time pop in and out, and I'll usually try to be here as much as possible. And Don and I work closely together in terms of supporting you in this process. Thank you.
I'm Lorraine Daw. I'm a councillor out of Oromocto, deputy mayor, currently serving at the moment. I've lived in Oromocto since I was in grade 8. I've been there quite a while. And I've been very involved in my community in a lot of roles in volunteering, but I've held many positions in nonprofit organizations. And currently I'm volunteering with the Oromocto Food Bank, Oromocto surrounding area food bank. So when the list came up and Mayor Bob said, "Where do you want to go?" I usually aim for finance, but I said, I'll try something a little different. And I said, I think I'd like to try this one because I'm very much interested in, like yourself, transportation. We don't have a great transportation unless you have a car. We do have great walking within our communities. And I see the need for the well-being of our residents, because there's certainly a lot, as you know, with the homeless and the feeding and things like that. So I thought, well, I'm going to give it a go and see if that's something that I can contribute to.
Yes, well, I'm Bob Simpson. I'm counselor in Nackwick, Melville. I'm a bit like Hank Snow. I spent most of my life teaching in Nackwick, and took time out spent 4 years in the legislature. I have 9 years as mayor of Nackwick and 6 years now as councillor. In the past, I was on the board of Region 3 Health and chaired that board for a year or so. And also then retired from I had retired, I guess, in 1998, I think, from the school business. I was executive director of the New Brunswick Healthcare Association. And that was supposed to be a 6-month position, turned into 7 years. And I was involved in the creation of the New Brunswick Health Research Foundation. And I was hired to create and start that organization. And after a couple of years, with everything in place, I retired again. And then I got a call in 2016 to run for council. And so I'm still here. If you're old enough, you will have done a lot of things in the past. So, but this committee, it wasn't that I looked at several and chose the mayor, who was also Tim Fox. The mayor of Nackwick Noble is another Tim Fox. And he asked me if I would do this, and I said, yes, be glad to. I think it's when the reform process started and with the Service Commission on the edge of it, the former council, which I was a member of, wasn't anxious to do this, but we decided, we have to jump into it with both feet to make it work. And so far so good. All our new council is working together, going in the same direction. And so now this is another thing that the expansion of the responsibilities of the Service Commission is pretty critical to the success of the organization, the municipal organizations in central New Brunswick. So let's make it work.
I'm Cheryl Pepin, counselor for the Harvey Rural Community. I'm also, I work as a community developer for Horizon Health Network, so this seemed like a natural fit for me. We had a team of community developers from Horizon that work within communities across New Brunswick. I think in the Capital Region alone, there's 5 of us. So there's definitely an opportunity to collaborate with those community developers. And I also wanted to be part of this committee to bring that rural perspective, because I know when we get lumped in with the Capital Region, sometimes that can be lost. So I want to make sure that I'm representing rural communities. Don't know.
The original strawberries this evening are brought to you courtesy of the farmers in the Grand Lake area. And baking is coming from the Queen South Bakery. So, person giving the plug is Suzanne White, and I applied for the staff position here of social inclusion and community development coordinator. Probably needed my head examined because if you read the job description, it is quite long. But what I hope to bring to the table is experience working with community groups on poverty reduction issues. I've also been the executive director and founding member of Nourishing Movements in New Brunswick, which Tim was the instigator of, and involved in more capacities with some other groups as well. So have a lot of interest in seeing what we can do working under this new mandate with large people voices to bring together the urban and rural perspective.
So I'm Kate Rogers, your chair, and I'm the mayor of Fredericton. I've been on council since 2012. Came mayor in 2021. And when I was a councillor during my, like many councillors had to always have a day job, right? And I've typically worked in the community sector or at the university.
So I was the director of the University Social Policy Research Network. That was a network designed to connect the researchers from the public universities to decision makers in government. So this idea that decisions would be evidence-based, informed decision-making was the goal of the day, and the organization, it was the brainchild of the late Andrew Scott, and he hired me to build the organization. And I certainly remember how much we turned to help Research Council in the early days because of the data gathering that we were doing. And so but all that to say, so that is sort of in one aspect. I've done, my background's political science. I've done a lot of policy making and policy research, but I have typically chosen work in the nonprofit sector because I like the governance model of nonprofit. I like board governance. I like being an executive director that works for a board. I like when many minds with varying interests and varying backgrounds come together to make decisions on behalf of an organization. Much of my work was done in the arts sector. But it was beyond that, and certainly I also did some consulting and some policy writing. I penned the Overcoming Poverty 2, the second poverty reduction plan for GNB. That was a very interesting process. Anyway, so I've had this weird and varied background that makes a lot of sense to me, and all culminated really in then my work at the Fredericton Community Foundation, which I think in a way, when we tackle this work, I think that my closest comparative will be that work, because at the Community Foundation, you find so many different types of community groups. And there's a lot of breadth to that organization, and you have to be very knowledgeable about the various social sectors. And so I think that we're going to do the same here. The same is going to happen. Tim actually was my predecessor and helped hire me. So we have this past relationship, but it seems to me as we go around the table, a lot of like-mindedness, and we've touched, all of us in various roles have touched doing this type of work, whether it be volunteerism or our jobs or whatever. We've touched sort of community development work, which takes lots of different forms. And I think that what lies ahead of us is figuring out how we're going to tackle this work. It is a very, very broad mandate, this committee. And I know that we're going to discuss that this evening. But when I listen to all of you and hear about all of your backgrounds, that is very encouraging, because I think we're going to need all of your minds as we approach this work. So I'm glad that we're all together. Don't know how I became chair, because I think any one of you could have been chair, but I'll carry out the role for a while anyways. So that's our introductions. Don, I'll pass it over to you because I think you're going to go over some of this material
Sure.
with us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we heard a couple times as well around the table. There's a new area. It's a broad area, and it's deep as well. And so we need to find a way to. My objective is for us to find a way to be involved in this area. To not diminish any kind of existing volunteer goodwill, or for anyone to see that, here comes the Regional Service Commission, this is a hostile takeover. We don't want to do that. There are people in the community doing very good work in a number of areas that have been pointed to us by the province. So I thought what I would do is kind of a tour of foundational documents that we have that have been put to us as a group of service commissions. So this is all none of it's kind of specific to us here, but it's contextual and perhaps will help us chart a path forward. And the first thing I wanted to that I sent around was sort of guidance that we have in the legislation, and it's very brief. And it's not very prescriptive. It simply says that we're required to undertake activities related to regional community development, and it doesn't do any job. It doesn't make any attempt to define that. The other thing it tells us is that this is how we'll share the costs of what we do, and that sharing is going to be based on our community's population and their tax base as a percentage of the entire region. So that's all that we take from the legislation. And it doesn't really help point us at where we expect to go. So the next thing I included was an excerpt from the commission's bylaws, which where it lays out the different committees that it had. And I've highlighted the Community Development Committee. And I just want to say, don't hold your questions to the end, or observations to the end. If you have something to say, that, you know, let's pitch in. This wording that's in this bylaw borrows from a mandate guide that was put out by the province and different documents that have come through them. And what we're tasked to do is to ensure that there's a coherent regional vision and plan. And then it starts to outline the areas. So regional transportation, affordable housing, newcomer settlement, diversity promotion, social inclusion, healthy communities. So, you know, we should have that finished by the summer. And those are all really complex areas. And the reason that regional transportation is here, because it's kind of a more or less a separate component, but important for the well-being of communities. We went through this, and Bob and I were talking a little bit earlier about my experience last year as a transition facilitator. The province's solution to a lot of things was, we'll form a committee for that. We'll form a committee for that. And had we listened and followed all of their direction, I think, John, we identified 16.
Yeah.
We would have had 16 standing committees. And, you know, it's beyond our ability as staff to support, and beyond your ability as directors and elected people in the region to support. So we look for ways that we could marry up like activities. We're not going to talk much about transportation today, because I'm not the lead on transportation. Brett McCray is, and at our next meeting, he'll be here, and we'll sort of try to peel back the onion skin on transportation in a little more detail. So our committee is structured to have 7 members, one of whom has to be a director, and that's our chair. And the rest of the folks are elected people from communities in our region. So what we're trying to do is have that mix of rural, urban, and rural and urban sometimes defies size. You know, we can have really small urban areas and really large rural areas. And so we have a lot of variety in our region. The other thing that the bylaw recognizes is that we can't do everything. And so when we start to look at these areas, affordable housing, newcomer settlement, you know, our vision is that there's a group of people who are active in that area now, or there isn't. And we'd like to lever off that existing strength or create it and have it flow through here to our board, so that our board can identify and support the areas that meet their objectives and further the well-being of our communities. So finally, you know, our job is to facilitate collaboration, identify needs and gaps, and support regional initiatives. You should know we have 2 relationships. We've inherited 2 relationships. One of them is with the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation, ESIC. And the Community Inclusion Network has already been rolled into the RSC. And Suzanne has really helped us in this startup period, maintaining that momentum, while as a board and management, we've had a lot to digest in a very short period of time. And so we've been able to keep that running forward. We also have a relationship with the Resiliency Group of Justice and Public Safety. And Suzanne has been leading that for us. She talked about her job description being broad, and I can tell you she has a lot of capacity, she has a lot of passion, and we're fortunate to have her. So that's kind of how we structure our own governance around community development. The next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, just give an overview, is our strategic plan. So our strategic plan was authorized, approved by the board at our June meeting earlier this month. And it was a requirement of the legislation. We had until the end of June, tomorrow, June 30th, to do a 5-year strategic plan. Well, we were able to get that done. And, you know, one of the things that when you limit time, that plan could have had more clarity. It could have been much more than its 38 pages. It could have a lot more detail. There wasn't time. Part of our work as a committee is going to be validate what's in the strategic plan, to convert that strategic plan into a tactical plan, which is, you know, our activities that we can perform and or help be performed by others that advance the overall goals of a robust and healthy region. And let's, you know, we should recognize life is a lot more challenging now than it used to be. And I was mentioning to Lorraine that next week I'm going to spend a week in charge of an 18-month-old boy who's my grandson. And I think about what he's coming along in, and I had a much easier job growing up than my kids did. And my kids are going to have had a much easier job than he's going to have. So life is just becoming more and more complex. Or at least, or I'm falling further out of touch, one of the two. And probably it's a cute combination of both of them. So that's kind of the strategic plan, the overview for community development, which is on page 11 of that plan, which, by the way, is available on our website. Says that we'll establish a committee. Here we are. And we're going to look at, and here's some familiar words from the bylaw, a vision and plan in the area of affordable housing, newcomer settlement services. And so a lot of summary of what's in the bylaw. The bylaw kind of flowed out of this, which flowed out of another document. It's about filling in regional gaps and needs, trying always to make sure our language is inclusionary and recognizes that there's a wealth of talent already in the region addressing these complex areas. A companion agreement to the strategic plan is the implementation guide. So the implementation guide is a first brush, if you will, at that tactical plan. How do we take this big level thinking? How do we operationalize it? And so that's what we have here. It's got the green heading and the blue slashes down the side. What I want to talk about here is just to set expectations is section 2.1, the implementation timeline. So there's some specific things listed here. And I think that this is the proper time to talk about your role as a committee member. What is the committee to do? The committee, your job is to oversee, to monitor, to report to the board. So we're not going to ask you to do staff's work. We recognize you're all on councils. Many of you have jobs in addition to that, and you have committees with your existing councils. We respect that, you know, your time is offered up in a lot of places. But we do need you to bring your perspective from your communities and your personal experiences. But we're not going to ask you to do work. We recognize the difference between, you know, staff and policy setting and managing and monitoring. And I thought the proper place to say that is when we talk about the implementation activities. And we have them in 3 categories here. You know, the near term, which if we look at this, is, you know, support member communities in terms of physician recruitment and healthcare initiatives. I'll circle back to that. Support local organizations, facilitate sharing. So this is the first 6 to 12 months is about getting started, orienting ourselves, introducing ourselves to the people who are who are active in this area. I don't want to say hand-holding, but reassuring that, you know, we're not an agent of the province come to take over from the government. I'm here to help, right? You know, we don't want to give them that idea. With respect to physician recruitment and healthcare initiatives, kind of at the last minute, we were advanced $100,000 from the Department of Health, unexpected, entirely unexpected. And it was given to us to recruit healthcare professionals and doctors. And that's money for 2023. So we had to figure out, well, what are we going to do? Where did this come from? And so the result of all of that is that there are 2 existing committees in our region that work on that. One centered out of the city here and one centered out of Oromocto. And we're flowing that money through to those committees because they're already active. They have initiatives that are in place. And, you know, we had to move kind of quickly with that. Typically, that kind of thing would have worked through this committee. We would have come to the committee and we'd say, okay, now this is funding that we have, that we need to address the region and the regional goals. We would talk about it. You folks would develop a recommendation for the board. We take that to the board and board would decide. We didn't have time for that this year. I understand that next year we're going to get $50,000. That's kind of the talk for this same thing. $50,000 doesn't go very far when you're trying to recruit physicians. But as we start to work through our program of work for 2024, that'll be one of the things that comes up. In the midterm, 1 to 3 years, we're looking at asset mapping in terms of what are the pieces of infrastructure and, pardon me, and social capital that support our work. Public health mapping, food insecurity, overcoming poverty. So overcoming poverty, which Kate was the principal author for Overcoming Poverty 2, is now Overcoming Poverty 3, which represents our agreement. We are a distribution agent of that plan through our agreement with ESIC, and we're on the verge of a new plan coming out, Overcoming Poverty 4. So, so in the next 1 to 3 years, we'll be dealing with that, and we will be meeting, hopefully in July, with ESIC, John and I, to start to talk about the arrangement between the 2 organizations. The arrangement that we have now was done quickly. Wasn't, you wouldn't call it a negotiation. Like most of you experienced doing reform, it was ready, fire, aim. And we had to address a lot of these things. And so we're now holding, we now have an agreement that might not be equitable to us, but anyway, we'll work on that, and we'll be coming back to you folks because we don't have the authority to sign agreements on our own with other organizations, but our facilitator did. And that wasn't always well received, and I know it because I signed commitments for other communities where they felt like they were losing their input, and in that moment they had, so.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
At this point, so what is ESIC without the SIMs? So all the SIM coordinators moved to regional service commissions, correct?
Yes, although
Or some were new hire, I guess.
some were new hires, yes.
But that they were removed from the ESIC structure and put into the regional service commission structure,
Yeah.
correct?
So,
So what's left in ESIC?
well, in fact, ASIC had a contract with host agencies in over 12 communities. The project was created by consortium relation. And the local government reforms those contracts are the same.
And now.
So now the contract with the Regional Service Commission, so E6 still continues as it did before. It's just that the contractual relationship into the community is with the new provider.
So do you, or do you still work with these? So so do you still report to ESIC in the same way that you did previously?
In the sense that there's that contractual relationship, so in return for funding, the host agency committed to developing a regional plan, to supporting community efforts, to advance the plan, to finding opportunities to fund projects that help to advance the plan, and so on and so forth. So that those functions remain the same, it just gone down to regional service commission. So E6 in the same.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the contractual links into community change.
That's great clarity. I always sort of wondered how that unfolded. That's great.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail that. You know, the system didn't have time to disseminate during the big rush of 2022 in terms of reform. So, and then in the longer term, identify opportunities for advancing long-term collaboration goals. So that's what we have laid out in front of us in terms of our first draft at a tactical guide. As you can see, a tactical plan, not very specific. And it's written that way on purpose. One, because we didn't have a lot of time, and two, because it really should be this group of people rather than outside consultants and staff that decide on the specifics of our tactics. I do want to make an observation with respect to, I'm not going to get into the mandate development guide that's as part of your package that runs, I don't know, 36 pages or more. But I want to draw your attention to what's the future going to be like? So on page 11 of that document, and this is a direct quote. Over time, the goal will be to have the RSCs to be the government of New Brunswick's main point of contact for these new mandate areas in the region. So now the goal, when they say the goal, they're describing the provincial government's goal. So when I look at that, I can see there's more coming here. And they're going to come to us first, and they're going to expect us to, I don't want to say solve the problems, but respond to the challenges that are identified for local activity.
Where does the voice of the individual municipality go?
So that's a great question. And throughout, we should talk about that now. Throughout reform and the delivery of these new mandates to regional service commissions, we have been tasked to address regional issues. But there continue to be local issues. And so our communities exercise their voice on regional issues through this organization, through the board of directors of the Regional Service Commission. That's the way it's been designed. And on local issues, through their own councils. If we're candid, not every municipality likes that. Many municipalities, if we're candid, are suspicious of regional service commissions, fear a loss of autonomy, and fear being absorbed and overwhelmed in the larger organization. Our job here as staff and directors and committee members around this table, Bob, just like you said, is let's get in and make it work. So it's up to us to make that work. And what I've said now is kind of my personal opinion based on my 20 years in local government and what I see.
Well, if I understood what you were saying a moment ago, municipalities have to take their concerns to, I still want to call it the RSC.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so our contact with their MLA or our contact with the minister might be considered inappropriate, but I can't see the city like Fredericton not having its own direct line like the other cities would to the people in government.
So I don't think that any municipalities approach to their MLA. Or a government partner directly would be inappropriate. I mean, as a municipality, you have positions. And much like a council, you know, this board is gonna take decisions that aren't unanimous. And some communities are going to be respectfully opposed. And I think those communities should not, I don't know, feel threatened about expressing their opinion.
So do you mind going back to what you were saying and say it again? When you talked about
Regional versus local?
where the concerns had to go to council, government is going to look to the RSCs.
So all I can tell you there is, you know, I can read the quote.
Yeah.
And the quote says, over time, the goal will be to have the RSCs be the province's main point of contact for these new mandates in the regions.
So it says main, not only.
What's that?
It says the main point of contact, but not the only point of
Yeah.
contact, so. there's a little bit of-
And that's their goal.
But it is sort of, it's somewhat counterintuitive in that, well, I'll speak on Fredericton's behalf, and I recognize we're in the largest city in the region, but we have staff expertise in some areas that we're not going to give that up. Like, we've just hired a housing specialist, so we're certainly not going to relinquish our efforts in affordable housing to the regional service commission. It's not to say that we won't share, share knowledge and information and expertise. I'm very willing to do that because we want the region to have success. But we don't want to relinquish authority. And I'll be very frank, the housing strategy that was just released today did relinquish authority. And you had 3 big cities. I wasn't the only one on the call with the minister that said, what about all of our efforts for 2 years? We have been working exhaustively at tackling affordable housing, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what we're just supposed to forget that work. I mean, that's nonsensical. What I'd rather do is bring that expertise to the region as opposed to relinquish it to the region. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it is. I'm baffled by it too. I mean, I really, really do want it to work. I don't understand. If we follow that path, to me, that's not the most efficient way to bring success to the region.
That reminds me, Mayor Rogers, of the position Mayor Woodside had at a meeting out in New Maryland when they first started talking about creating RSCs.
I was there for that meeting.
Were you?
I accompanied as the staff report.
So
I was
you
the staff
remember.
report for at that meeting. I was there.
So,
And they made us sit at different tables.
Yeah.
I remember that.
so how many years ago was that?
That was 2011.
Yeah, it was just before I got on.
Yeah.
council.
Wow,
He was not,
12 years ago.
he was not.
So, I know this is very early, but what's going through my head right now is that there may be certain areas where what the long-term goal is may work, but it won't work for all of them. Like what Mayor Rogers said, housing was probably one example. So it may be our goal here to identify what would fit in that model.
Yeah, so, again, in the area of personal opinion. A one size fits all solution. I've seldom seen those work, right? And so, we need to find the right approach for the capital region. And that will likely be different than it is in the Acadian Peninsula or Charlotte County.
Yeah.
And we have. So in 2022, the province really exerted its control over its local government units to accomplish their objectives. But as that works its way through, it's up to our local government units, of which, one of which I'll call is the Service Commission, because it's a collection of local governments. Is for us to find our own way and what makes sense for us.
And is your sense that we can identify the areas where we see there's real opportunity, where there are gaps? So when I think of settlement, for instance, I know that that's an area where we're really challenged in the city, and I believe we are in the region as far as it's not, but that ecosystem's a little bit messy and complicated, and like, I think, what a great thing for the region to tackle, right? Like that, so, I mean, I feel that when we look at this work, we can do this like really high level on all of them. Or we could really delve into the areas where we know there needs to be some real focused energy. And my preference would be to do the latter, but I don't know. When you say it's not a one size fits all, do we have the liberty to do that as a regional, and this committee to say, yeah, all these things are important, but we think in our region, these are the areas where it needs help, it needs work.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to, but I think we have the ability to personalize it for our region. We have, what do we need to do from a legislative point of view? Well, remember the very first sentence, we need to be active in this area. It's not very prescriptive. If we look at an area where we've been delegated work that's extremely prescriptive, it's around recreation and cultural infrastructure. We have very little wiggle room in how we treat that, because it is laid out in the act and the regulation what we must do, when, how often we must do it. But here, we must undertake activities related to regional community development. So that gives the board a fair amount of latitude. And the board will take recommendations from this committee. And so you have the opportunity to, provide recommendations and try and steer the direction of the board through reasoned, researched, credible execution plans.
I think too, Diane, if you don't mind me.
No, absolutely.
Within that, what we're looking at is that sense of, to your point, Mayor Kate, looking at cooperation, collaboration, learning from one another. We have to be active in the areas. So we need to know what's happening. How are we supporting the communities? What can we do to try to move that marker forward? But at the same time, as Don much more eloquently said, we have latitude to look at what are those priorities out of the gate. Eventually, down the road, we'll be into each of those priority areas that have been identified for us. And how that looks is going to be largely in part to, what this board decides to bring back, what this committee decides to bring back to the board, and how that progresses forward. So, we've just gone through a big exercise, developing our strategic plan, implementation guide. We've developed guiding principles and our values, over here, and we put all this up on the wall so that everybody is reminded of what that looks like, and at each of the meetings. So I think there's great opportunity here, and I think, maybe what looking at I don't want to rush through anything like that, but looking through, next steps in terms of prioritizing what are those areas that we commonly see, and what can move the marker forward the greatest way in terms of that. I mean, it all depends on the communities and what the communities are saying, and how those voices are being heard. So I don't know if that helps clarify anything, but.
Just for me, I think we have to look at our, I try and approach things a little, what's my circle of control here? Well, I can't control the legislation. I can't control the announcement today about about the housing strategy. These are constraints that are put up around us. And I'm reminded of some things I had to say as a facilitator last year. I'm not here to justify or sell you on local government reform. I'm here to implement it. So we need to implement it in a way that makes sense for us. And we need to be aware that let's not be naive. It's going to get stickier. And the reason it's going to get stickier is we're one of the big three. And in 2024, we are going to have to develop plans around poverty reduction, homelessness, and mental health, three incurable things. We're going to be tasked to cure. So, we will have to be nimble, and we'll have to respond to, initiatives that in the lay of the land that's designed by others. And candidly designed for a provincial sort of one size fits all solution when we're unique. One of the things that pretty clear in our province is that our regions have individual personalities, and the communities inside our regions have individual personalities as well. So, you know, the analogy is, that's been used several times inside of this, is we are building this plane as we're flying it. And we need your help.
Need that voice, and I don't mean to interrupt, but, you know, if you look at the strategic or the implementation guide, and you look at 2.1 on the timeline, with Don handed out, you look, it's a support member communities by sharing best practices for physician recruitment and healthcare initiatives. Well, you know, if you look, the board has basically come to a process to address that through the, you know, through the funding mechanism. And then how do we move that marker forward with those two committees? You know, there's been talk about having one committee for the region, that it'd be more effective for everybody involved. That may or may not work. We'll see what time brings us. But when we talk about supporting local organizations in the delivering of social, cultural, recreation programs to promote connectivity across the region and facilitate the sharing of our members' voices on community capacity and resiliency, I think the action item there is, you know, support local organizations. And what does that support look like? What does this table view that support looking like? And then how do we transition that into, you know, an actionable item in terms of that? And that's like facilitating and the sharing of our members' voices. So we've got a few streams that we got to look at, defining our terms of reference and how we move through the process. Look at how do we develop something that we take back to the board for support and for endorsement, and then how do we, you know, how is that fully actionable as we move forward?
So would we envision, will our terms of reference give structure to that? I mean, I don't, so we're responsible for establishing our own terms of reference as a committee. This is, yeah. And, I mean, would we envision that the terms of reference could maybe lay some of that out? I mean, sometimes the terms of reference do, sometimes they don't, like, sometimes they're that precise, sometimes they're not, like.
So,
I'll be honest, I have no idea how to tackle this, and I've been up front all along, even when I was the chair. I have no sense, even the support local organization, how are we supporting, who's supporting local? I support them in my city, I'm sure all of you do in your communities, you support your local organizations. I don't know how the Regional Service Commission does that.
you know, that's an interesting question that this group has been tasked to answer.
Right.
And so,
I'd say no. Because I think we're all doing it. I think my first instinct is this group should focus on what's not being done well in the region. And because I think there are a couple of areas where we could have some wins, because nobody's really owning it that well. And I would go there. I think as far as supporting local organizations, nobody knows their local organizations like municipalities, like the towns and villages and city, like no.
Mayor, could there be possibly some coordination, some facilitation of linkages, bringing those groups together in some way to help advance their needs, share best practices? I don't know, does all of that happen today?
Like what groups?
Well, whichever those community organizations are, and maybe that's something that we can help provide through our networks. I don't know.
For example, food security is on the list too, and there's no one organization, it's a collective. Energy is happening to bring all of those different groups together that have an interest in food security. To figure out how they may be able to maybe have bigger impact by working towards some common strategies. That feels great.
Okay,
To use the food knowledge.
so there you go.
So the first part of my discussion's been good because it's, you know, it's got you thinking and observing. I'd like to, the last document, I'd like to sort of just sort of deal with the bold print is the actual strategic plan as it relates to community development. And that's the one with the yellow header. And so it's you know, it talks about themes. What are the areas of responsibility that we have? Well, we've been asked to be active in housing and affordable housing, and that world all changed at 1 o'clock this afternoon. And so I haven't even come close to digesting all of that. I'm not sure that many people have. Senior care and aging in place. That's throughout the province. That's a challenge. Physician recruitment, recreation, healthy communities, social support, collaboration. Those are areas that are determinants of community well-being. We have the classic strengths and weaknesses, the SWOT analysis. I'm not going to go through each of those bullets. I'm going to ask you to sort of read that, digest it, think about it. And then we go on to sort of priorities and proposed actions. So affordable housing. Well, let's create a rural and urban affordable housing to meet the growing demands and population shifts. I don't know about that, but I mean, it's one thing that could be done. Regional resiliency. Well, we need to better understand as a committee the existing arrangement that we have on resiliency, and we need to hear from Suzanne and the resiliency coordinator. Overcoming poverty 3. Well, yeah, there's goals in that, but we need to prepare ourselves for overcoming poverty 4 because it's close. I don't know how close it is, but I'm told that it's close. And then we develop vibrant, sustainable communities. The vibrant and sustainable is they're words that have been used throughout this entire process. In terms of community development, you know, I think the well-being, the collective well-being of our communities is a good proxy for whether it's sustainable and vibrant. The strategic plan identified and perhaps misnames main service providers. These are people who are active in the areas now. And it's part of an environmental scan. It's by no means exhaustive and complete.
I was gonna say, it seems to be pretty short-lived,
Yeah,
like incredibly short-lived.
Yeah.
And I'm a little bit disappointed that the John Howard Society.
you know what? We can add that, no sweat. We can absolutely do that. So, and one of the questions that I think John asked Suzanne early on, how many groups are active in our region? And her response was something in the order of 300. Right? There are not 300 here. And so we have work to do as staff to sort of give you a better feel of who's active where and about what. And as part of that work of trying to identify gaps. And then finally, you know, connections to provincial and federal priorities. So you have the ESIC Overcoming Poverty Plan, Justice and Public Safety. And so these are a bunch of, let's call them informative or contextual documents done by other levels of government. And then finally, and this is the regional community development mandate guide. It's a draft. I don't believe it'll ever be addressed again. I don't think this will ever,
Sure, I've read it.
yes, but there are a number of documents that were prepared during, or not prepared, worked on during reform. Environment, local government's a small group of people. And then they really staffed up by borrowing people from other departments for reform. And now it's over and those people are going back to finance and treasury board or wherever they were. And it won't surprise me if they don't have the capacity to just, publish this without the word draft. From our perspective, it's a guide and it's entirely optional, so the word draft on it, to me, kind of not material. There's some good guidance in here. There's also some things in here that indicate a lack of familiarity with the way that regional services commissions actually do work. And but for the most part, it's informative.
Yeah.
But what have we got for staff?
So you're looking at it right now.
I mean, in the whole organization.
We have about 60.
About 65, but the vast majority are that work in our solid waste division at the landfill. We have most of our professional staff, if you want to walk through just for a moment. We have 3 of us in the governance side. We have 2 planners, one starting next week or the week after. We have 2 on the community development side. We have a couple of enforcement and bylaw enforcement inspectors. We have 3 building inspectors and and we have 2 people that work in the office admin, but also support other committees throughout the organization, such as PRAC. And they help support those. And many of our staff do 2 and 3 roles within their main frame of their job, such as Suzanne down here. Our mandate is vast. We're starting to look at staffing up a little bit. And what I mean by a little bit is we're hoping to be able to attract 3 people. And one of them would be similar in a policy capacity on from an economic perspective to track all of these things and try to bring coordination to it. What we're looking for is some support with Don and Suzanne, especially on the community development. I mean, there's no way that Don and Suzanne can do this alone, and we need to reach out to the communities. We need that help. We need to rely on that expertise, such as what the city has. We need to be able to cooperate and share and be part of that. And, so we're looking at that. We're looking at, staffing up on our bilingual admin side and trying to get more, some administrative support in that way. And then we'll be looking down the road for probably a couple more people. We're a very lean organization. If you look at, in terms of our budget, I mean, and, with that, a lot of it revolves around the solid waste division and, community planning, or community planning and development was here prior to, very lean as well. We're a very lean ship.
And so I'll say, if the city of Fredericton has an office of community inclusion, it would tackle a lot of this work. And it's staffed with 3, and it draws on admin from the mayor and CIO's office. So essentially it has a 4th and then works very closely with the deputy CIO. So there's sort of 5 people who are working in that 3. That's what they get up every morning to do. We haven't even begun to tackle the community development stuff.
Well, I was just thinking, just this committee, how many staff, it's gonna take more than a few. And they have to have a broad array of information in their head. I wrote down, should we start from the social determinants of health and work it down to what works here? On some of these very social kind of objectives. And it's a huge job. We've got to be selective.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we said, one of the themes that have come across, broad and it's deep.
Yeah.
And, I'm reminded of that, it's saying the longest journey starts with a single step. We're in the phase of single steps here. And so we have to, I believe we have to manage our expectations in terms of, it needs to be realistic and it needs to be attainable and there's a lot of unknowns.
One of the things that encourages me is that when you realize that all of these organizations around the province will not be like one size fits all, there will be differences and there should be differences. And so we need to be cognizant and create our own reality here because people who live in Caracat or Perth Andover think a lot differently than people do in the seat of government.
Yes.
Counselor, to your point, we're in weekly contact with the other RSCs. We have weekly meetings. And it's to exchange that information. A lot of times we have the Department of Environment, and Local Government, or whether it be health or finance or whoever needs whatever we need to try to get to that understanding level. They come in and present and do Q&As, and we have that constant ongoing piece. But we also, with one of the strengths that we do have is those great opportunities. I don't know if everyone gets it, but I highly encourage everybody to sign up for the Ignite newsletter. The Fredericton Capital Tourism Group send out a letter all the time, and they do wonderful things in promoting the area and to draw and attract people in. Today's the newsletter that came out from Ignite today. If you go on their calendar of events, it's showing a whole lot of the effort. We had just signed a contract that was authorized by the board between to enter into a companion agreement with Ignite to provide workforce and labor force development services. You're seeing a whole lot of newcomer settlement, maybe not settlement service, but trying to help the newcomers get to permanent residency. Newcomers coming in, how to effectively manage, your money in Canada. They're doing a whole piece on trying to make sure that, newcomers are being settled. There's all kinds of opportunities out there for businesses to network and partner and things like that. So we do have a lot of strengths that we can draw from. And that's why we're looking for kind of those coordinators and stuff that we can help put some of these pieces together in the same room, because all of this, like you said, sir, you got to kind of start and drill down, but it's all those components. And you look at our mandates, well, they're all right here. That's why we put the banners up here. Everything right down to land use planning, what we're doing in the regions, in terms of that, looking at very important in terms of housing and development, very important in terms of attracting newcomers, whether they be from repatriating, New Brunswickers across Canada to welcoming newcomers, and how do we make that inclusive? And so we do have a lot of good foundational work. We do have a lot of strengths that we can reach out to, and the provincial government has been reaching out saying, look, we're ready to be a partner. Just, what do you want us to do? How can we do it? Or how can we help? So there is a lot of synergy. We've got to build a team to put it together, but the vision for what we need to do in terms of this particular committee will come from you to the board, back to us, and then looking at that implementation. So, but I think you're absolutely right. Look at it. How do we drill it down? What are our strengths and weaknesses right now, and how do we bring them together?
In both economic development, which in the case of Ignite has captured that workforce development, and because of the work that they're doing with the local immigration partnership, they've worked in that field before, but both that and tourism are existing entities. And I feel that's why this is so daunting. Like, we had two existing entities that came in and helped us package up what economic development is going to look like in our region, what tourism is going to look like in our region. We don't have an entity to work with to do that for this. And so it's a little bit without, I mean, I think we've all said, we've all certainly dabbled in it, like, but it feels a bit daunting to have to provide that guidance without an expert voice, organizational voice guiding our thinking on it, and I don't know where we draw that from.
With a huge history and with a big staff. I mean, both of those organizations are well staffed, right? And then I look at this and I look at you three and I go, God love you. Because I'm feeling a little overwhelmed too with it. And I think one of the things that we have to think about is how we manage expectations. Not only amongst ourselves, but in our communities. Because, I mean, when it was announced that the Service Commission would be taking on all these things, I think the first reaction in our community was, that's a lot of new things. Like, how are you gonna manage that? And then secondly, well, I guess it's all gonna be done at that level. So, all these great things are gonna come out of here. And I think people forget that it takes a lot of time to develop those things. I mean, you look at affordable housing alone, that is massive. Like, that is a massive undertaking, right? If we're gonna get into homelessness, that is a massive undertaking. So I think we just need to, I agree with Mayor Rogers that I think it would be good to look at a few areas that we can have an impact on, now or soon, and drill into those areas and look at getting some wins early, so that people can see that things are actually happening and moving forward. And I say that too from the perspective of charitable and nonprofit organizations, because there's some expectation from those groups on this group as well, right? And they're watching. And I think that that's important, that we be able to pull the collaboration piece together, be able to work with those organizations and it not just be fluff. And so, I think we have to avoid the fluff.
Councillor Fox,
It does.
Councillor Fox, and couldn't agree with you more. That's why when I first arrived here, as Don had said earlier, I'd asked Suzanne, like, we were going down through the, regional transport, affordable housing, newcomer settlement, diversity promotion, social inclusion, healthy communities. And then, as Don said as well, very eloquently, and around November, we were told the big three would have another social focus that also included physician and healthcare recruitment on top of homelessness, poverty reduction, and mental health. So you look at that, and that's why we asked Suzanne. I was going on meetings and people were expecting me to come with answers. And I was the new kid on the block. I didn't have the time. I'm just being straight up with everybody. I'm sitting there going, I'm here to learn. They're there to hear what we have to say. And the reality was, you got 60 faces on 2 screens looking at you, or maybe 70. And they're waiting for me to say something profound and just intellectually sound that we're going to solve this problem. So that's when we asked Suzanne to have a look at that and say, in these areas, how many different groups exist? And then that became overwhelming in its own right, just because of the sheer volume. But that's a good problem to have, for the simple fact that there's so many people committed to doing something good and something well in your community. I guess, to your point, Councillor Fox, how do we bring that together, and how do we start collaborating and getting that through in those specific areas that you as a committee look at? Or how do we do that forward? I guess it's the old adage, right? How do you eat the elephant? Well, one bite at a time. And well, we better figure out, are we starting on the tail or the toe or the snout or what, so I think that's what we, looking forward, that's what we're gonna have to come back to. But I think it's gonna take some time for us all to process how we go forward.
So is it worth our next meeting coming back and sort of doing a bit of brainstorming on that, brainstorming where the areas are where we think we can get the greatest traction? Maybe I'm just trying to think how we get to that action.
The immediate needs,
Yeah,
there's some needs like housing is immediate. And the quicker we would come to something on that, the better. I
and
don't,
even that one, so to me, the housing one's interesting because how certain communities tackle housing is very different from how other communities need to tackle housing. So I don't know how we have a come together moment on that. I think we all know we need it. We know that we need housing. And there are various funding programs. And I think we could provide support in the making information available, but we get, and then I say, what, like, there's a lot of resources where that information is. There's a whole housing portal we could go to. I don't know why we would recreate that. So I think that, so for me, housing is the one that is actually, in a way, the one that should almost be most community specific. And that it's in here.
But I think I think it's good that it's here because communities do tackle it differently or completely ignore it. And I think that's part of the issue too, is this is a regional issue. One of the things I really like about service commissions is that it forces us to work collaboratively as a region. And I think that there's a lot of learnings that could happen, especially, well, I can talk for Hanwell. So in terms of Hanwell, I think there's a lot of things that we could learn from the other communities in terms of that.
I mean, how to develop a strategy like those.
Like how to develop a strategy, how
How to
like
tackle it. I'm
even,
sitting here being very quiet, but
Yeah.
I'm a sponge.
Yeah,
And then I think that you tackle on quite a few things that I'm sitting here, that's why I acknowledge with the spot. But not speaking just for Armada, but the fact that where some communities are choosing to ignore it and they'll do something else because they don't know how to attack.
Right.
They don't have the ABC steps. This is where we start. This is who we contact. Maybe that's what needs to be put on there and not make it so detailed, but make it a general thing so that they know where to start. So it isn't so overwhelming, because once they start, then they can get the more detailed information. Oh, that's what we have to do. Okay, now where do I go get that? Like, they don't have to be running out of the gate full steam. They have to just go slow, gather what we need, and then we give them the rest. At least that's what I'm thinking.
and I think our responsibility to the region to have affordable housing, for example, right? To address issues of poverty. You know, one of the comments that I've heard in my community at times is we don't have any poor people. Like, we're a wealthy community, right? Now, and I won't say that's come from council, but I've heard that often. That's the poor people live in Fredericton, right? It's not our problem. Like, I think it is our problem. And I think that having it here just solidifies the fact that it is a regional issue and that we have a regional responsibility. Each of our communities has a
And
responsibility.
an understanding, because poor does not mean just finances.
Exactly,
It could
exactly.
be other things.
Yeah,
one of the
I haven't been to
things,
my house.
one of the things my wife and I do on our volunteers is for Lifeline, these things that go around your neck, and if you fall over, you press the button. My wife's been doing that for 25 years, but anyway, I help her now that I've retired, everything. And a lot of it is through Haynesville, New Zealand, a lot of it's out through the country. And we see some desperate situations. They're in Nackert, Noble, they're in the Keswick, one Central York, is it? they call it?
Central New York, Nashua.
So out in the country is where you see people just surviving. And you wonder how they do it. And
but when I hear something like that, that is well beyond, like, that's Department of Social Development, there should be workers in the zones, that's a region, like I appreciate there are huge issues, and I think, and when eyes aren't on them, so particularly in the rural areas of our region where there aren't so many eyes watching people, I think there's a huge concern. I don't know how, as a regional service commission, we could ever begin to tackle, nor do I think we should, nor do I think we have the expertise to do that. I think there are government departments that are already dedicated to doing that, and I don't think we should mess with it, frankly.
What's ours and what's theirs?
Yes, sort of more, I'm more, where does the expertise lie? I don't. You know, but is it a matter of, like, because I do want us to be useful, I know I'm thinking out loud, so I'm not being naysaying, I'm thinking, where is our value add? So to me, this committee should be, where is the value add in community development? And maybe it's a matter of sharing best practices, I mean, maybe that's what it is, maybe we look at each of these individual areas and say, can we do a best practices document or best practices guide for each of these areas that we share through our region? And who's got what, like a potluck, who knows how to do what in this area? and
So you're
bring
not
it
reinventing the
together.
wheel on everything, you're tightening those spokes to
Mhm.
get things to work better.
Yeah, because some of us can't share practices, like I love regional transportation stuff, I really interests me. Because God knows we don't do public transit very well in the city, I don't think, and I think there's a real opportunity for like an intra-regional transportation network, and I think sort of the communities that are doing volunteer rides, that knowledge and our knowledge, like, I think we could come together and do a really neat document, probably could do a really great housing one, how communities can do that, like there, so maybe that's where is that a place to start? I don't know, or maybe I'm premature in trying to get to a solution.
I heard a number of interesting things. And, you know, I heard about how daunting this all is, how, you know, we're overwhelmed collectively and individually. But we have an opportunity to fix that. And part of the opportunity that we have to fix that is focus. Right, so, and prioritization. So, you know, when Kate talked about brainstorming what areas are we going to take on first, that's a way for us to make this less daunting. And to your point, Tim, about nonprofits looking at us and watching, there are larger groups looking at us and, you know, look at what the province has included in this basket. Stuff we're very hard to win on, right? And so that's one thing that I heard. Early wins. Well, okay, where can we generate some early wins? They feel good, but they also give credibility, right? And Lorraine said something that made me think of enabling communities. So we're maybe our job is to enable communities. I mean, it brings me back to when I talked about, you know, there are regional issues and there are local issues. There's regional transportation, there's local transportation. It's not one or the other. But you know, perhaps we can get involved and assist local issues by enabling communities, by being a repository of what are the best practices, what has worked. Chipman, for example, and now it's part of Grand Lake, they have their own housing authority. They created a housing authority to respond to a need that they have. So there are pockets of excellence and innovation throughout the region that could be better publicized.
Grant Lake has a $300,000 scholarship fund for recruiting doctors. I found that out yesterday. I had no idea. I spoke with the mayor of Grand Lake and he said, I know you got that money. You guys are doing something with it. We've got a $300,000 account that we put aside to help to give scholarships to doctors who promise to come back. I thought, what an awesome idea. We don't have like that. Like, because you're right. There's lots of pockets of amazing ideas out there.
Yeah. So you may see I'm kind of tending towards a wrap up now because I want to finish on a high note. I think the idea of our next meeting had, being brainstorming about perhaps what those early areas that we want to attack are. We've got an implementation guide, we've got a strategic plan, and, you know, we're looking at the tactical part of that. We need to develop, if we're going to stray a little bit from that, we need to be able to put a good case in front of the board to explain why. Because the board has, in a way, directed us on this schedule and these areas. And this is the place, I guess the other thing I want to say is, you know, board meetings are transactional. This is the place where we need to be able to safely think out loud. Right? This is the place where we don't need to say, you know, Nakamo Melville thought that this is not the place for that. This is the place for saying stupid stuff and not prejudging any idea. The principles of brainstorming. So, Madam Chair, I would suggest that our next session should include a discussion of transportation, sort of an outline that we've had here. We need to update the committee on our existing arrangements with ESIC and resiliency. Both those things can be done, I think, inside a half an hour. And perhaps we could spend an hour brainstorming on where we start. And we can take the time between the interval to better familiarize ourselves with this material. So that's the staff suggestion, which you are entitled to throw out and go 180 degrees in the other direction if you wish.
So I have two questions on that. So when we say brainstorming, are we brainstorming where we think the opportunities are for some wins? Or are we brainstorming sort of this enabling communities? Because I feel our conversation kind of went in two directions. One is let's pick the areas where we know we can have impact fast. And the other I was hearing was maybe this becomes a shared best practices. But potentially that's a low hanging fruit. I don't know.
My recommendation would be for early wins.
Okay,
And, you know, and it's in sense of priorities. Looking for early wins doesn't preclude us from, you know, developing that. It takes a while to develop a knowledge bank. And so I think that people do want to see, I think our communities, I know our communities are looking at this and saying, yeah, I don't know about this. And, you know, like, we're not naive. Right, no, we're not naive about that, and you know, I'd add to that, nobody in this building asked for this. Like, this isn't something we went out and asked for. So we have all the same emotional responses to it that you folks do. So I think we need to demonstrate some confidence to our communities as well.
When we get to a point, if we do, I would expect we would get to housing at some point.
Yeah.
Could we expect to have like an expert to come in and talk to us, somebody who's
I think so.
into that, like Peter Corbin, for example?
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's, I mean, these people have ideas that we
Yeah.
haven't thought of.
Yeah, we would be irresponsible if we tried to limit
Yeah.
the brain power to just the people around this table. Right?
I ask another question.
Sure.
I didn't see anything in here that pointed directly to climate change. When I think of Edson, Alberta, they were evacuated because of forest fires. And a few days later, they were evacuated or were threatened for floods. And is that something that should be part of our community development thinking? Where are our recharge spots, for example? And, I used to think of just Nakoik for that.
Mhm.
Now it's a lot bigger,
Mhm.
and I don't know that area.
So, stormwater doesn't recognize municipal boundaries. Forest fires don't recognize municipal boundaries. You know, it's an issue that affects regions. It's not for me to say whether or not it should be part of our community development, but it's not something that's in the plan, and if it's something that this committee thinks is important in terms of community development, then by all means, we should take it on. my knee-jerk re-answer to that is, you know, we have a resiliency group in the region. And its genesis was during the early days of COVID. You know, how do we get through the other side of it? At that point, we didn't know it was going to be a multi-year thing, right? How do we get through this and be more resilient and less vulnerable going forward? So resiliency is a huge area, it covers a lot of things, and I think climate change would fit there. Resiliency is part of this committee's mandate, so. Everything's this committee's mandate when you think about it, right? Pretty broad. Yeah.
There are some references to that under the planning and development part of what we will do and what we're looking at in terms of that. So again, that's that coordination, bringing everything together and how all of the mandates fit together. Madam Chair, I'd make one recommendation, or just throw this out there. Would it be beneficial to have a facilitator for the brainstorming session? Someone that's worked on helping us develop the plan. I don't know if they'd be available, but they would certainly understand.
I think I'd rather us do it amongst ourselves.
Okay.
That would be my, thank you for that offer, but my preference is, I don't know. I won't say any more than that. I think we can manage it fine ourselves. I do, so as for our next meeting, is this something, do we like meeting in person? Do we want to do hybrid? Hybrid's difficult with a small committee this size, or do you prefer online? I'm an in-person person, but I benefit that I just live down the hill, so I don't want to be selfish. But if people like in person, I'm happy to continue that way, and I don't know what people's appetite is if,
For me, I like in person when we're at this stage, when we're at a different stage where it's bringing something, working on a small project and bringing something together, that I don't mind Zoom and whatever else, but until we get running, I like to be in person. Because I think you get a better feel of interaction and where people are coming from.
I totally agree. So if everyone's happy with that, I'm happy to do that. And how frequently, we had talked, Don and I talked a little bit about frequency of meetings, but I sort of forget what we settled on. Same month.
Every 6 months.
Yeah, so,
I know we said more regularly in the short term,
Yeah.
but I can't remember how more regularly was. What did we
well,
say?
I don't remember either date, but as I sit here and reflect upon what we've talked about and give people an opportunity to perhaps have another look at the material with the context of what we've discussed here, and being selfish and recognizing I'm away next week, you know, would 3 to 4 weeks be too large a gap in the committees? And that will give us time to, as staff, to look at some kind of structure around the brainstorming, to come up with some ideas to share with the chair, so that we're a little more directed than we were. You know, this was a introductory orientational type session, and our next session, you know, we want to be a little more focused and a little more specific.
Are we thinking the week of the 24th or the week of the 17th? Week of the 24th, I guess, would be 3 weeks.
Right,
Correct.
right.
So the week, if it's a Thursday, though, that would be council week
Right.
for me.
So how I would prefer to do it is, because I'm notoriously bad at this. But Kelly Shaw in our office is
Okay.
really good.
Same with me, and Angela's really
Yes.
good in my office.
And
Let's
so-
do that.
And that's how we did this one.
Yeah.
So what I would do is I would ask Kelly, you've all heard from her, poll the group, and you know, she can put a meeting together in an hour, and it takes me a day. And then typically it fails. So,
Let's do that.
yeah, and we'll look for a time during the week, and she has a master grid in her office of every council meeting
Yeah.
in the region, and so she can tell us what days are free.
And do people like this time of day? Do people like midday? Do people like what, do people have a preference for time of day? I can be totally flexible because this is my day gig, but I don't. What do others have?
If it's a Thursday, that's one of my volunteer days, but I could be flexible.
I prefer it not be a Thursday.
Okay,
Like,
okay.
any other day works pretty well.
And do you like daytime? Well, but you're saying the only daytime hours you can do would be Thursdays, so if not, it has to
Well,
be. an
no,
evening.
when I'm talking Thursday, that just how I,
Oh, okay, because I like daytime only because I personally, I have a lot of evening demands on draws on my time. It's harder for me to schedule evening, come up with evening time available.
For through the day as well.
Okay.
Can't tell you how happy that makes staff.
And are you two both fine through the day?
depending on what it is, I'll look around. it.
Okay, all right, so maybe. if-
We'll look for a business hour, 90-minute to hour and a half to 2 hour block. We'll have, Kelly will solve that issue for us during the week of the 24th of July. And that's easy for me. She tells me when to show up and I do.
Which is Thursdays.
Okay, okay.
Thursday.
okay. Well, we'll get Kelly and then Angela. We'll figure it out. We'll get some times out. Okay, so is that, we're at 7:32. I like to.
A few minutes over, but
Oh, you guys, bad track record already. So, so unless there's anything else, we'll adjourn the meeting and, I do feel. I will just say personally, I feel I have a bit better grasp on it.
Yeah.
Than I did coming in. I mean, it's big, like, I don't think I have any solutions or anything, but I have a better sense.